Welcome back to the Health Z podcast. We have an interesting book summary for you today.
We certainly do.
We're diving into, well, a real retro health trend, you could say. It was sparked by a scientific giant, Linus Pauling,
Ah, yes, Pauling.
and specifically his really influential book on vitamin C and the common cold. We're going to explore what Pauling argued back then, and then, see what more recent science has to say about it all.
That's right. We're looking at Pauling's vitamin C, the common cold, and the flu. It actually started as vitamin C and the common cold in 1970, and then he expanded it in 76.
Right.
And it's fascinating to revisit this work, especially given Pauling's huge scientific standing at the time.
Absolutely. I mean, the man had 2 Nobel Prizes, chemistry and peace.
Exactly. So when someone like that publishes a book on health,
Mm-hmm.
people definitely sat up and took notice.
You bet. And his core argument was pretty straightforward, wasn't it? And incredibly appealing, really.
It was. Basically, he claimed that taking high doses of vitamin C could prevent the common cold, treat it if you got it, and even help with the flu.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. What was the actual basis for his argument? What were the key ideas he laid out in the book?
Well, Pauling kicked things off with a pretty fundamental biochemical idea. He suggested that we humans suffer from a kind of molecular disease.
Molecular disease. What did he mean by that?
His point was that, unlike most other animals, we've actually lost the ability to make our own vitamin C. We can't synthesize it.
Ah, right.
And he connected this to his earlier work on sickle cell anemia, suggesting it was a kind of basic molecular problem, an insufficiency.
Interesting. So he viewed our need to get vitamin C from food as almost an evolutionary hiccup that became, well, problematic over time.
Precisely. His evolutionary argument went something like this. Our primate ancestors probably ate diets incredibly rich in plants, loaded with vitamin C. So losing the ability to make it internally wasn't initially a disadvantage, maybe even freed up some metabolic energy. But then, human diets shifted.
Towards grains, cooked foods,
Yeah,
less raw stuff.
exactly. Left fresh, raw plants. And that's when, according to Pauling, this inability to make vitamin C became a real issue, leading to this state of chronic sort of subclinical deficiency compared to what our bodies really needed.
So a key takeaway here is his idea that we need way more vitamin C than just the tiny amount to prevent scurvy.
That's fundamental to his whole argument. Much, much more.
That's definitely a thought-provoking start. So biochemically, how did he think vitamin C actually fought off colds and the flu? What was the mechanism?
He detailed its functions, highlighting its role as a powerful antioxidant, protecting cells from damage. That was already known.
Right.
But he really emphasized its role in boosting the immune system. Specifically, he put forward a hypothesis that vitamin C was crucial for making interferon. That's a protein our body uses to fight off viruses.
Interferon, right, I've heard of
Yeah.
that.
And he was actually quite upfront that this was just a hypothesis at the time. It needed testing. He even wrote something like, I formulated the hypothesis that vitamin C works against viruses because it helps make and activate interferon. But he added that it hadn't been tested by experiment yet.
Okay, so that was the why behind his claims. But what about the proof? What evidence did he actually present in the book to back up the idea that these high doses worked?
He looked at several clinical studies, but yeah, he definitely leaned heavily on a few key ones. The Ritzel study from 1961 was a big one for him.
The Ritzel study, what did that involve?
It was done with school children at a ski resort. One group got a gram of vitamin C daily.
A gram, okay.
And Pauling interpreted the results as showing a really significant drop in how often the kids got colds and how long the colds lasted in the group taking vitamin C. He even calculated this thing called integrated morbidity, which basically means the total burden of sickness, like the total sick days across the group. And he found it was much lower for the vitamin C kids. That study really became a cornerstone for his argument for gram-level doses.
A ski resort.
Yeah.
That's interesting. High activity, maybe cold stress, specific conditions. Were there other studies he pointed to?
Yeah, he also mentioned a 1942 study by Cowan and colleagues. They reported about 30% fewer sick days with just 0.2 grams, 200 milligrams of vitamin C per day.
So even a lower dose showed something there, he thought.
Right. And importantly, Pauling did his own meta-analysis. He basically pooled the statistical results from 4 different placebo-controlled trials, including Ritzel and Cowan.
Combining the data.
Exactly. And his conclusion was that the probability of seeing those decreases in cold symptoms just by chance was incredibly low. He calculated a p-value, I think it was 0.000002, which, statistically speaking, is very significant. He argued this strongly supported vitamin C's effectiveness. So he wasn't just cherry-picking one study. He felt the overall pattern was clear.
Okay, that statistical analysis does sound pretty compelling, especially back then. So, based on all this, what kind of doses was Pauling actually telling people to take?
For just general health, he suggested 1 to 2 grams a day, so 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams.
Okay, that's already quite high compared to standard RDS.
Oh yeah, way higher. But then he also recommended much, much higher doses if you felt symptoms coming on, like several grams taken every hour.
Every hour.
That was his recommendation. He made a clear distinction between prevention, the daily 1-2 grams, and therapy, hitting it hard with massive doses right at the start of symptoms.
I see. And later on, he expanded this beyond just colds, right?
Yes, in the 1976 edition, he broadened his arguments to include influenza and even suggested potential benefits for other diseases too.
It really sounds like he had immense faith in vitamin C at these mega doses. Did he address the critics? Or studies that, didn't find any benefit?
Oh, absolutely. He was definitely aware of the skepticism in the studies that came up empty. His usual response, his main explanation for those negative findings, was that the studies just didn't use enough vitamin C.
Ah, the dose wasn't high enough in those other trials.
That was his critique. He often argued the dosages were simply too low to show the real effect he believed was there. He could be quite critical of the research design and trials that contradicted his claims.
Okay, so that gives us a really good picture of Pauling's arguments from his book. Fascinating stuff. Now, let's jump forward. We've got decades more research now. We looked at a couple of recent papers revisiting these exact claims. Let's start with the first one.
Right. The first one we looked at is titled Vitamin C Supplementation and the Common Cold Was Linus Pauling Right or Wrong? This is a 2024 paper by Harri Hemilä. It's actually published on ResearchGate.
Hemilä, okay.
And what's interesting is that it's an update, a commentary on a paper Hemilä first wrote way back in 1997. So he's bringing a long-term perspective to it.
Okay, so nearly 30 years later.
Yeah.
What's Hemilæ's verdict? Was Pauling onto something or not?
Well, Hemilä argues that, yes, Pauling was fundamentally correct that vitamin C does have real biological effects on the common cold. He bases this even on the trials available back in the 70s.
So looking back at that early evidence.
Yeah. Hemilä points specifically to Pauling's own 1971 meta-analysis, the one we just talked about. That analysis did show a statistically significant reduction in overall cold illness, the morbidity, with doses of 1 gram a day or more. So Hemilæ's point is that the evidence, even then, suggested something was going on.
That's interesting. So the core idea had some legs even back then. What about all the studies done since the 70s? Do they strengthen that view?
Hemilä notes that later studies, especially those using at least that 1 gram per day dose, have generally shown pretty consistently, actually, a reduction in how long colds last and how severe the symptoms are.
Reduced duration and severity.
And here's a key point. These benefits seem to be more pronounced in people under significant physical stress.
Like who?
Think athletes, soldiers in intense training, that kind of thing. And this finding actually lends some support back to Pauling's emphasis on that Ritzel study, the one at the ski camp. It suggests vitamin C might be more helpful in specific stressful situations.
So maybe not a magic bullet for everyone sitting at a desk, but potentially beneficial under stress. Does Hemilä buy into the really high therapeutic doses Pauling pushed?
Not entirely. While Hemilä agrees Pauling was right about some biological effect, he also suggests Pauling probably overstated the size of the effect and how much it applied to the average healthy person just going about their life.
Okay.
For instance, that claim Pauling made about a 45% reduction in actually getting colds. Hemilä thinks that's likely an overestimation based on all the evidence we have now.
Right, the prevention aspect seems weaker.
Exactly. But Hemilä is also critical of some earlier reviews that just dismissed vitamin C entirely, saying those reviews were flawed too. And interestingly, he points to some evidence suggesting a dose-response relationship, meaning more C gives more effect up to maybe 6 grams a day, which does offer some partial support for Pauling's idea of using higher therapeutic doses.
Because it's complicated.
It is. Hemilæ's conclusion is basically that vitamin C's effects on colds are modest, not miraculous, but they are significant and real. It does more than just stop scurvy. He specifically backs up Pauling on reducing duration and severity with higher doses, but he's much more cautious about general prevention for everybody.
Okay, that's a really nuanced take from Hemilä. Let's bring in the second study we reviewed.
Right. The second one is titled The Long History of Vitamin C, From Prevention of the Common Cold to Potential Aid in the Treatment of COVID-19. This came out in 2020 in Frontiers in Immunology. The lead author is Giuseppina Cerullo with Massimo Negro, Mauro Parambelli, and several others.
A 2020 perspective, even touching on COVID-19. Interesting. How does this study frame Pauling's original claims?
Well, it takes a broad historical look. They acknowledge Pauling's early work and his big claims, but they note that those claims about high-dose prevention were often based on, let's say, less rigorous trials back then and maybe some over-optimistic extrapolation.
Okay, similar point to Hemilä there.
Yes. But they also agree that later research has confirmed some benefits. They concur that vitamin C supplements, again at doses around 1 gram per day or more, do consistently seem to reduce how long colds last and how bad the symptoms feel.
And do they also mention specific groups?
They do. They highlight that this effect is particularly noticeable in people who start with low vitamin C levels or, again, those under significant physical stress. So we're seeing that pattern emerge again. Partial validation, but context matters.
It really does seem to keep coming back to context and maybe stress levels. What about the mechanism? How do these researchers think vitamin C is working?
They discuss the usual suspects. Its antioxidant properties protecting immune cells, its role in helping immune cells like neutrophils work better, and its involvement in collagen for physical barriers.
Makes sense.
What's also interesting in this 2020 paper is they touch on emerging research using high-dose intravenous vitamin C for critical illnesses like sepsis or even severe COVID-19. There's some early suggestion it might help reduce inflammation in those extreme situations.
Wow, IV vitamin C, that's taking it to another level.
It is, and you could see that as maybe indirectly supporting Pauling's wider idea that vitamin C has significant immune-modulating effects way beyond just basic nutrition. But let's be clear.
Yes.
This study strongly refutes Pauling's big claim about preventing most colds in generally healthy, well-nourished people. That part doesn't hold up.
Okay.
But it does align with his view that vitamin C does more than just prevent scurvy, that it interacts with the immune system, and it also echoes Pauling's point that maybe some negative studies just used doses that were too low.
So if we try to synthesize these two recent analyses, what's the big picture? Where does the science stand now on Pauling's vitamin C crusade?
Well, it seems the current consensus is definitely more nuanced than Pauling's original, quite forceful assertions. Taking high-dose vitamin C regularly, probably not going to stop most of us from catching colds. That seems pretty clear now, a definite step back from Pauling's hope.
So prevention is largely off the table for the general population.
Pretty much. However, there's fairly decent evidence it can slightly shorten how long your cold lasts. Maybe by around 8% in adults, perhaps a bit more, like 14% in kids. It's not dramatic, but it suggests a real physiological effect.
A modest reduction in duration.
Exactly. And then there's that specific group, people under intense physical stress. The evidence there seems stronger, suggesting it might cut their risk of catching a cold by about half.
That's quite significant for them.
It is. So that offers some partial support for Pauling, but really only within that specific context.
And what about taking it when you already feel sick? Pauling's therapeutic megadoses.
The evidence there is weaker. Starting vitamin C after symptoms appear doesn't consistently show much benefit in most studies. That contradicts Pauling's therapeutic advice, although, as Emily suggested, maybe very high doses taken extremely early could still have some effect. The jury might still be out on that specific scenario.
And it's interesting that even the Linus Pauling Institute today recommends a lower dose than he did back then, right?
Yeah, I believe their current recommendation is around 400 milligrams a day for general health, which is still higher than the basic RDA, but much lower than the grams Pauling advocated.
So it feels like while Pauling's grand vision, maybe eradicating the common cold with vitamin C, didn't quite pan out, his work wasn't for nothing. It clearly spurred a massive amount of research.
Oh, absolutely. His work, controversial as it was, forced the scientific community to take a much closer look at vitamin C. And while people have certainly criticized his methods and maybe his selective interpretation of data at times, the underlying fact remains. Vitamin C is a vital antioxidant, and it does play important roles in immune function. Those basic premises are well established, which resonates with his core ideas.
And maybe individual responses vary too.
That's entirely possible. Your baseline nutrition, your genetics, other factors, it could all play a role in how you respond. So the current advice generally leans towards getting your vitamin C from a good diet, lots of fruits and vegetables.
Right.
Routine high-dose pills aren't broadly recommended just for preventing colds in healthy people, but taking it might offer that small reduction in how long you're sick if you do catch one.
Well, that was an interesting look at a retro health trend. Join us here next time for more interesting health information.
It really shows how science evolves, doesn't it?
And
Pauling asked big questions, and even if his answers weren't entirely right, the pursuit led us to a more nuanced understanding.
That's something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.